You don't seem to understand. Earth isn't yours to conquer.
When the Muller twins attack the White House in an attempt to kill the president, the Guardians of the Globe and Omni-Man get there just in time to save the president and civilians. Afterward, Omni-Man, aka Nolan, goes back home to his wife and son, and they have a chat about the powers of his son, Mark. Later that night, Mark's powers kick in. As soon as Nolan finds out about it, he commences his son's training. The next morning, Nolan takes him through a few things he should know and helps him balance his abilities. Just like his dad, Mark has super strength and flight. The following day, Mark dresses up and flies out into the city to play superhero. His dad arrives at the scene and then takes him to his costume designer to get a costume. While he's on that, he discovers that he'd also need a name for that. During training with Nolan, he tells him that he is scared that he might not be enough. But after a talk with his dad, his confidence levels go up. He decides to be called Invincible and returns to art for his costume. Soon after, he gets an opportunity to test his ability when a villain attacks the city. Meanwhile, Omni-Man summons the Guardians of the Globe and kills them all. The Global Defense Agency and organization that works with the Guardians goes over to the Guardians' headquarters just to find all the Guardians dead and Nolan near death. Deborah and Mark show up at the hospital where Nolan is being hospitalized. However, Mark has to leave when the city is attacked by an alien race known as the Flaxans. He tries defending them off on his own, but when he starts to fail, the teen team, conspiring of Duplicate, Rexplode, Adam Eve, and Robot come to his aid, and the Flaxans are pushed back. At school the next day, Mark recognizes Adam Eve from the previous day and she takes him to meet the rest of the team. After a few days, the Flaxans return stronger than before. But Invincible and the teen team manage to defeat them by breaking the time bracelets on their wrists. At the end of the battle, Mark has to leave to go see his father, who's now awake at the hospital. When Cecil Stedman, director of the GDA, asks Omni-Man about the Guardian's death, he lies. After a while, the Flaxans return, more prepared than before, and would have gained victory but for Omni-Man, who destroys their planet to prevent any further incursion. Back at the Guardians' headquarters, Darkblood, a demon detective, in his bid to learn more about the Guardian's death, speculates that one of the Guardians is the killer. During the Guardian's funeral, Cecil not only asks Robot to come work for him, but allows him to pick the superheroes to become the new Guardians. The superheroes are selected from an organized competition. Mark isn't included in the competition because his father would rather train him himself. After the competition, Rex, Monster Girl, Black Samson, and Duplicate become the new Guardians. At Mark's home, Cecil appears in Mark's bedroom and asks for his help. Mark obliges, excusing himself from Amber, his love interest, and goes to stop Doc Seismic. At the scene, Mark and Eve are the only superheroes available, but they're enough to stop Doc Seismic. Afterward, Mark runs home and apologizes to Amber. Later that night, Rex apologizes to Eve, but she turns him down. Looking for someone to talk to, Eve goes over to Mark's house, but finds Mark and Amber kissing, so she goes back home. At the GDA prison, the Muller twins attempt an escape with some help, but one of them gets killed during the process. In the prison's control room, Cecil walks in and reveals that Robot is behind the escape of the Muller twins. Darkblood then appears at Nolan's house, attempting to talk to Deborah regarding any piece of information that could shed some light on the night of the Guardians' massacre. However, he leaves when he notices Nolan's presence. While Mark continues his training, his father tells him more about Vitrum, his native planet. Later that night, Deborah goes through the internet searching for Darkblood, but she stops as soon as her husband and son return home. However, she doesn't know that Nolan already knows about Darkblood's visit. Following the visit, Nolan confronts Darkblood for coming to his house and scaring his wife. In return, Darkblood asks why he killed the Guardians, but he denies the accusation and storms out. Shortly after, Cecil comes over to Nolan's house requesting he secretly follow the astronauts going to Mars as a safety measure, but he refuses the offer. Just then, Mark walks in on the conversation and decides to go in his father's place. However, that goes south when Mark takes a nap and wakes up to find them gone. Darkblood uses Nolan and Deborah's vacation as an opportunity to search their house for clues. While on it, he's captured by Cecil and sent back to hell because of his propensity to make Omni-Man's crimes public. Meanwhile, back at Mars, Mark finds his way to the Martians' hideout, and some of the Martians take him to the Emperor of Mars. He finds the missing astronauts and learns about the Sequids, a parasitic alien race marooned on Mars, and their ability to control humans and destroy planets, but doesn't know one of them is already infected by the Sequids. Like most new superheroes, Mark is so hung up on saving the world that he neglects his personal life. Everything from his relationship with Amber to the state of his GPA in school totters right on the edge. His mother, however, stumbles on Darkblood's diary and gets curious when Darkblood emphasizes on Omni-Man's costume. Later that day, she cunningly gets Nolan out of the house, giving her enough time to find the costume. Meanwhile, Titan, a guy who can turn himself into rocks, asks Mark to help him take down his boss, Machine Head, and Mark agrees. In an abandoned house leagues away, the surviving Muller twin clones himself. As soon as he does that, Robot walks in and asks that he clone Rex's DNA. On getting to Machine Head, Mark and Titan realize that taking them isn't as easy as they expected. A fight breaks out, and as it goes on, Mark and Titan find themselves at the losing end. Suddenly, the Guardians of the Globe come to their aid after getting a tip from an anonymous caller. The Guardians kill all the superhumans, except one, Battle Beast. But the Guardians aren't without their losses. Mark and Monster Woman are at the verge of death, while Black Samson has a broken arm. After the night, Titan leaves Invincible there before the GDA and Cecil arrive at the scene to take the bodies, including Machine Head. At the GDA facility, scientists are testing Mark's blood in a desperate attempt to find a weakness for Omni-Man. Mark survives, but Monster Girl and Black Samson are still in comas. After a few days, William invites Mark over to Rick's school for the weekend. Mark sees it as an opportunity to patch things up with Amber and decides to bring her along. Meanwhile, Deborah has the costume examined and discovers that her husband is behind the Guardian's death. When Mark, Amber, and William arrive at the school, Rick takes them on a tour when a cyborg starts attacking randomly. As Mark fights it off, William discovers his true identity as Invincible. As they get back to the house, Rick steps out to get drinks and is kidnapped by D.A. Sinclair, a scientist who takes humans and turns them into machines. William, who was on the phone with Rick before his abduction, goes after him, but ends up getting caught himself. Just like Rick, William was on the phone with Mark before his abduction, so that sets off alarm bells in Mark's mind, leading him to search for them. He gets caught in the process and discovers that Rick has already been turned. As the cyborgs beat Mark up, William successfully brings Rick back to himself. Then, he and Mark fight off the rest and capture Sinclair. Afterward, Cecil and his team take care of the bodies. Back at the hospital, Black Samson and Monster Girl wake up from their gutters. At the Grayson home, Deborah confronts Nolan for murdering the Guardians as soon as she walks in, but she doesn't get any answers. The next morning, Deborah asks Nolan why he killed the Guardians. Nolan finally agrees to have done it, but doesn't explain why. Disillusioned by his actions, Deborah loses her trust in her husband and asks him to leave the house. Shortly after, Cecil's security operatives take her to the facility. On getting there, Deborah discovers that Cecil has always known that it was Nolan who killed the Guardians. At the Muller hideout, Robot shows up and reveals that he used Rex's blood to create another body for himself. After this, he destroys his initial body and replaces it with the new one. After the process is done, he tries to take the Muller twins back to prison, but he's called back to the Guardians HQ. After quarreling with Amber, Mark goes looking for Eve to talk. They sit at a cliff, discussing his heartbreak when they notice an occurrence in the sky, realizing it's Omni-Man. Cecil tries to stop him from getting to Mark. Curious, Mark and Eve decide to check what is happening. However, on their way, Mark sees his dad fighting an alien sent by Cecil and joins the fight. Simultaneously, Cecil calls Eve and tells her to go to the Guardians HQ. Back at the Muller twins' hideout, they bring Immortal back to life, attempting to control him, but it doesn't work, with Immortal then going after Omni-Man. He gets to the scene of the fight between the alien and the Graysons and targets Omni-Man. Invincible fends off the alien while Omni-Man kills Immortal during a live broadcast. After that, Omni-Man tells Invincible that they need to talk. Nolan tells Mark about his true identity. The Viltrumites, Nolan's people, are conquerors of galaxies, and Nolan himself was sent to Earth to prepare it for conquest. Nolan insists it's his destiny, but Mark can't stand the idea of Earth getting taken over, so he decides to fight his father, though he isn't sure he can pull it off. The fight gets heated, and even though Mark doesn't stand a chance, he continues fighting. His dad decides to teach him a lesson by taking the fight into Chicago, killing lots of people in the process. Undeterred, Mark continues to resist his father. Nolan continues to pulverize Mark until he's at the verge of death. However, memories of Mark's childhood and all the love his dad has for him holds him back from beating him further. He then flies into space, just as Cecil sends his team to bring Mark in. Meanwhile, the Muller twins are recaptured and taken back to prison. After the fight, Mark stays in the hospital for a while, and Cecil tries to cover up Mark and Deborah's link to Nolan. When Mark gets better, he returns home with his mother. Amber, Eve, and William come knocking, and they all step out for a drink. While they're out, Cecil calls Mark and tells him that someone is coming into space. Mark gets there and finds out Alan, an alien sent to warn Earth about Viltrumite on the planet. Alan tells him about the plans other planets have to join forces and fight against the Viltrumites.
But the fact it's just a small part of something much larger makes it all seem more manageable. I don't know, but it helps.
Sorry to rain on your parade. That happens on Earth, right? Anyway, once they find out your father took off, the Viltrumites are gonna come for you. Trust me, when they set their sights on a planet, they don't give up without a fight.
I'll be ready.
I hope so.